Okay. Good evening and welcome to the March 18, 2021 Parks and Recreation Commission special video meeting. This meeting will be a workshop format for the Commission to provide input toward the Recreation Recovery Reset Plan. I am Rory Westberg, Parks and Recreation Commission Chair. In accordance with Proclamation 20-28.10 and the Governor's extended Safe Start Order, tonight's Park and Recreation Commission meeting is using video conferencing technology provided by Zoom. The Zoom video of this meeting is being recorded and will be broadcast live via Zoom and will be uploaded to the city's YouTube channel later this evening. City staff Ryan Daly, Jason Kintner, Katie Herzog, and Meryl Thomas-Schatt, and consultant Emily Moon are participating in tonight's meeting remotely. Our council liaison, Jake Jacobson, will not be able to join us tonight. Oh, and Ryan Daly is also with us. I think I skipped Ryan, I'm not sure. Other public audience members are listening to the meeting by telephone or via the internet. Welcome to all and thank you for joining us tonight. Commissioners, please turn on your microphones and will city staff please call the roll.
Chair Westberg.
Here.
Vice Chair McCarthy.
Here.
Commissioner Richter. Commissioner Cohen.
Here.
Commissioner Gualtieri. Commissioner Birkenwald. Commissioner Struck.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, commissioners. We do have 4 commissioners present, so that constitutes a quorum for our meeting tonight. Before we start the business of tonight's meeting, I want to suggest the usual rules to help the meeting run smoothly. Even though there's only 4 of us, if you have a question, please use the raised hand feature, and I'll do my best to recognize commissioners in the order in which their hands are raised. And please limit yourself to 1 question and 1 clarifying question so that each commissioner has a chance to ask a question before we do another round. Additionally, prior to speaking, please state your name for those listening in on the meeting. Tonight's agenda will not include in-person public appearances in accordance with Proclamation 20-28.11 and the Governor's extended Safe Start Order. And it's my understanding no one signed up to speak tonight via Zoom. So we can proceed directly to the agenda. The first item of business is to review and consider approving the minutes from the February 25th, 2021 meeting. I hope you've all had a chance to look at the minutes. Commissioners may have a motion to approve the minutes of the February 25th, 2021 meeting.
It's Don Cohen. I'll make that motion.
Jody McCarthy, I'll second.
Thank you. So Commissioner Cohen made the motion, Commissioner McCarthy seconded. All those, let's see, city staff, would you please call the roll to approve the minutes?
Chair Westberg.
Aye.
Vice Chair McCarthy.
Aye.
Commissioner Richter. Commissioner Cohen.
Aye.
Commissioner Gualtieri. Commissioner Birkenwald. Commissioner Struck.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. The second item of business this evening is the Recreation Recovery and Reset Plan. We welcome Operations Transition Team Manager Ryan Daly, Consultant Emily Moon, and Recreation Coordinator Meryl Thomas-Schatt. And I'll turn it over to Ryan, I guess.
Thank you. Good evening, Parks and Recreation Commission. I do want to highlight, I did talk with Councilmember Jacobson, and he wanted to let you know that he will be reviewing this meeting, watching it, and then sharing with the full city council as well. So he wanted to ensure that he's still managing that communication for us, which has been very, very helpful through this process and others. And then also that we do have 3 commissioners absent tonight. I will be touching base with them over the weekend to make sure they've had access to this meeting and can share any thoughts with me on what the outcomes may be, so that we can kind of develop that into our next presentation for the April 1st Parks and Recreation Commission meeting. So just wanted to make sure that even though that those individuals aren't present, we will continue to be engaged with them over the next couple of days, honestly, since we are moving forward with this process rather quickly. So with that, I will pass it on to our consultant, Emily Moon. Emily?
Thanks, Ryan. Hello, commission members. All right, we're going to get right into it. I'm going to share my screen. When you can see it, give me a little thumbs up so I know we're ready to roll. Let's see. All right, thank you for that. Let's get to this view. All right, so I am very happy to be back in front of you tonight. I think one of the first things that I wanted to say to you tonight is I know how hard you have worked to absorb all of this information, provide us with feedback. And on behalf of the Rec Reset team, I wanted to say thank you for all the good work. We worked very fast and furiously over the last 2.5 months together to try to pull all of this information together. First, to kind of educate each other on what these terms mean, what a new structure might look like, how we can develop a philosophy that's going to serve us long term, not just through the remainder of this pandemic, but well into the future. And that's what we're presenting to you tonight. Having said that, I'm not going to go through all the bits and pieces that we've spent the last 2.5 months on. I hope that as you reviewed the materials, you saw a lot of things that were familiar. Really, this final report, this final strategy really stitched together all the pieces that we've had previous meetings on. So I'm not going to review all of it, but I'm going to hit some highlights just in case there's somebody who's out there listening, or at least as a little refresher before we get into some discussion. So tonight we'll review the reset strategy. I'm going to also talk with you a little bit about ideas for accelerating the roadmap, that 3-phase implementation plan. And we'll talk about why we think that is becoming a stronger reality and possibility for us at this point in time. And then if we have time at the end of the discussion, we'll touch on differential pricing. We'll talk a little bit about what that means, what the city has in place right now, and what it might consider doing into the future, and get some early reaction feedback, ideas from you. We're not putting a draft policy in front of you. We're not floating particulars of any particular type of differential pricing, but we just want to start to cultivate the conversation around that so that we can fine tune how we're spending our time researching policies and bring something back to you that may be of interest to you. And then if we also have time, we will show you a draft version of the fee schedule for phase 1. And again, I'll remind you, the commission doesn't really approve that. That's done at the administrative level within the department or division. But we wanted to show you how all of these philosophies and objectives that we have talked about kind of culminate into then what do we offer and at what price. So we'll just show that with you as a way to kind of show you one end product that we are working on. So tonight, what we're asking of all of you is to provide some comment on the draft reset strategy. The team will make any changes that you wish to make as a group. We're gonna try to do by consensus work a little bit here. And we'll bring forward a final version of that strategy to the commission's next regular meeting, where it would be appropriate for you to take action on the strategy. Ultimately, we do hope that at that meeting, you'll approve the strategy and you'll recommend that it be forwarded to the city council for your joint meeting on April 20th for us collectively to present it to the city council, get their initial feedback, help them understand all the components. And then during the month of May, we would hope that the city council would take action on the reset strategy by approving it, endorsing it, whatever verb they might choose to use. And also, we would hope that they would take action on the implementation plan, including the resource needs for at least phase 1. And then the second thing that we're hoping that you will do for us tonight, if we have time, is again to listen a little bit about differential pricing policies and options, and give us some initial thoughts on where the city might go on that front. And then lastly, we're going to share that draft fee schedule with you, and happy to answer any questions that you might have on that. So as a refresher, why are we here? Why did we even get to work on designing a reset strategy? And really the catalyst for this was the pandemic. While the city had experienced some budget reductions prior to the pandemic, and there was conversation about how to fine-tune programs and services, and to really try to work on effective and efficient delivery of service, the pandemic brought that to a head. The community center was closed. There were budget and staff reductions, and that gave us an opportunity to contemplate what the future should look like and how we could get there. So what was going to guide us in developing future programs and services. So I use the word opportunity many more times on this slide. So Jody would laugh again about the number of times I say opportunity. So I'm bringing this back. This indeed was an opportunity for us to re-examine priorities, make sure we had clarity on that, had some consensus around that. It was an opportunity for us to think about what to offer, how to offer it, and who would benefit from the programs and services that we offer. And then put that into a framework that would help guide decision-making. In the past, there wasn't such a framework. The city used other, I'd say, metrics and mechanisms to decide what was needed and desired in the community. This new framework provides some clear parameters for what should be provided, when, and how. And this also gave us an opportunity to spend some time thinking about the policies and procedures that we either need or that we need to improve upon. So we developed the strategy through a lot of meetings, a lot of conversation. Some of those took place here in this setting with the commission. Others took place as we had conversations with colleagues in other jurisdictions, or as reset team internal staff kind of meetings and deliberations. And we also had some significant public input via the Let's Talk website that the city uses for public engagement. And we had a survey that was conducted on Let's Talk and received over 550 responses. We performed a bunch of research and analysis to really think through what should be offered, how it could be offered, who's doing it well, what are the cost structures involved with various programs and services, what's the history been, what's the trend looking like, etc. And then we divided the potential output, the product that we were creating, into two pieces. We early on in January worked with you to develop what we call the immediate action plan, and that action plan guided the staff in getting geared up to provide programs and services that we believed would be feasible while the pandemic was still a constraint. And so that timeline was really about what can we do this summer into the fall, perhaps into the remainder of 2021. And we went to City Council and we presented that plan and asked for the resources that were necessary to get the immediate action plan in place. And then the second part of the strategy is that longer term strategy, the roadmap for the next 2.5 years. And that is what your report in your packet tonight really covers in depth, is the strategy that guides long-term decision-making. So more on what the strategy involves. There are, in my mind, 3 major components to it. The first is a cost recovery and resource allocation philosophy, and that helps us to really understand which of our operations are supported by taxes, which are supported by the people that participate in those programs, maybe which could be supported financially from other funding sources. And that philosophy helps to represent values and the goals of the city, helps us to communicate that our priorities are about delivering programs and services that meet the public good social core that we believe is fundamental to successful delivery of service on the island. And those are the programs and services that are good candidates to receive the tax subsidy. So they are supported by general fund dollars. And we also saw through the public surveys and by nature of the community and event center that the business sustainability core programs and services are also important to deliver, and therefore good candidates for the allocation of resources under this philosophy. And those programs cover more of their direct costs. They bring in revenue that not only could cover their direct costs, but could possibly cover their indirect costs or help provide some financial support for the public good social core programs that have to rely upon tax funding more than others. And as I said before, we saw that both the public good social core and the business sustainability core were prioritized by residents and users of recreation services on Mercer Island. The second piece was a pricing strategy, and that culminates in a bunch of products. We have a goal statement and a methodology that's described in the reset strategy. And we're going to start having some conversations about the policies that help to implement the pricing strategy. One of those is differential pricing, which we'll hopefully talk about a little bit more tonight. That's the second element of the reset strategy. And then the last is, how are you going to do this? It's the implementation plan, the roadmap. And so that part of the reset strategy includes phases that go over the next 2.5 years. We've called those phase 1 as foundational. Those are really the programs and services that we have to build first in order to be successful with others going forward. Those include things like inclusion services to make sure that access to programs and services is what it needs to be, and the administrative functions and the promotion services to help people know what is being provided and make sure that they then can take advantage of that. Second phase we call the structural phase, and that builds up from the foundation additional programs and services becomes more of the, I would say, fundamental elements that get offered and that are more public facing and probably more open to greater number of members of your community. And then the last is what we call phase 3, an established phase. And that's when we feel like the revenue is supporting some of those foundational programs and services. And we're beginning to offer programs and services that meet all types of users in the community. And that's another thing that we heard from the survey, that there's a desire to make sure that there's a little bit of something for everyone. And we're going to hit that beginning in the structural phase, but really that's more of the focus of the established or phase 3. And that roadmap also includes a list of policies and procedures that we were hoping to address over time, bit by bit, and as we get a few more staff members to help us with that work. So it includes everything that we want to spend time on and work with you on over the next couple of years. All right, so we said at the very beginning of this process that we were going to move quickly, that we had a lot to talk about, a lot to build, a lot to consider, and that it was going to get probably uncomfortable at some moment in time where we hit some sort of threshold with each other of I can't absorb anything more, or it feels like we haven't studied every single option that's available to us. And I said that we should just acknowledge that that moment is going to come, but this reset strategy is flexible. We have opportunities to continue to talk about how can we slow down, speed up, how can we try something a little bit different over here. I think it's going to provide good guidance, but it's not an absolute directive. And so I just wanted to remind you that we're going to have plenty of time to make any necessary adjustments. We should too, because we're going to learn as we go, as we start implementing things. We're going to get, for example, more data about the performance of programs and services. And so we're going to understand better, are we meeting those cost recovery goals that we have set as targets? And we're going to be able to evaluate, do we need to change something about our cost recovery pyramid in some way? And that's fine. That's exactly what we should be doing. I want to also encourage all of you that throughout this, we're going to be focused on the future. I've spoke to you about the fact that we don't have readily available all the data that I would like to have that mirrors this new structure that we're creating right now. And that's okay too, because if we're focused on the future, we're going to be able to use that data to double check some of our assumptions. Also, really within the last couple of weeks, maybe 3 at best, we've had some significant things happen. When we began this work in late December and came to you in January, vaccine wasn't available. And now a growing percentage of our community is getting the vaccine and is beginning to contemplate re-engaging in different ways. We had no additional guidance from either the federal government or the state about future or subsequent phases. If you recall, we talked to you about how the state changed some of the guidance in January, I believe, but it stopped short. It had 2 phases, and the second phase stopped with, for example, being able to occupy the community center at 50%. And we didn't have any idea, well, when does 100% happen? So we were lacking that information at that time. And we had no sense of what perhaps additional financial resources might be coming the city's way as part of the pandemic recovery or relief from the state or federal government. All of that has changed. Some of it just even within the last 2 weeks. And so now we have better hope that the community is going to be able to come into the facility, is going to take part in programs and services, and that we're going to be able to provide those in a safe and effective way. And we have more guidance from the state about what's allowable now. We have a better sense of the financial resources that might be flowing to the city, care of the recovery acts that have been passed by the federal government. Having said all of that, and also I should say, because we were getting feedback from some of you and from city council members and community members who now are feeling very hopeful and want to re-engage. And so there was an ask, even in our last meeting, to contemplate what would a accelerated reset roadmap look like. And we said we were starting to think about that, and we were contemplating what would be possible. And yet I want to still make sure that when we're moving forward taking advantage of all this good work that has been done. I want to make sure we move forward keeping our original objectives in mind. And that included bringing on programs that balance that public good social core and the business core, creating a pathway for financial sustainability, and filling the community's recreation needs in a way that is purposeful and wisely uses city resources. So I think we can still do that, and we can do it faster. But I don't want us to lose focus that just because we can now run a little bit instead of walking, we should, in my opinion, continue to make purposeful steps in that direction. So with that, I'm going to turn over the mic to Ryan, and Ryan is going to talk a little bit about what an acceleration plan might look like. This was the original roadmap that we provided to you in the last meeting. It's the one that's in the reset strategy that was in your packet for tonight. So I don't believe there's anything new here on this slide. And then he's going to talk to you about what a accelerated plan might look like. Tonight, we want to get some feedback from you on that. I debated about whether or not we should pause before we talk about the acceleration plan and just get your feedback on the reset strategy as is. But I know from your last meeting that one of the things that is on your mind is how can we get started and deliver programs and services sooner rather than later. And so we're going to kind of squish these conversations together. I'd like your feedback on the overall strategy, and then subsequently have some discussion about what an accelerated plan might look like. So I'm going to have Ryan talk about that now.
Thank you, Emily. I just want to highlight two of the words you said earlier: opportunity and flexibility. Really, you know, as we've gone through this process, we've needed to be flexible, both as staff and as commission. And I think that's something that's going to be maintained through this process, but obviously through the department as a whole in the future. So that, you know, we're really going to be looking to harness the opportunities and the flexibility. I don't want to talk too much about this slide because you all have seen it probably 5 or 6 times now. So if we want to go ahead and go to the next one, Emily, this is something that staff as well as Emily worked on to talk about what might be the opportunity from our point of view. So what you see here is the phase one foundational column hasn't changed. We still, those are a primary focus that need to occur as we move forward. Where you see on phase two, where it's in yellow, structural, those are things we think that might make sense with some commission input to move into that phase one, what we would call a phase one accelerated approach. And I'll highlight some of these right now and just speak to them a little bit to why we would recommend these opportunities. And I do want to say it will take additional resources beyond what we requested or proposed for phase one. You're talking about a few more staff members involved in this scenario. The fitness center, drop-in self-directed sports, that would be opening the doors to the community center. I think, some of the opportunity we have now that Emily mentioned was we have more information on where we are within this new phase three through the governor. And so that gives us some opportunity that we could meet that need now with some additional resource. School break programming, developing that, taking a look at what those opportunities might be, meeting a need for the community, specifically during that winter break period that I shouldn't even be saying the words winter. We're going into summer, but there is a process that we need to do some evaluation of what that programming could look like, and if there is a need out there for it. Preschool-aged programming, this really goes hand in hand with the seniors. I'm not comparing seniors or anyone to preschoolers, but oftentimes the programmatic elements are similar, and that could be something that's taken care of within like a recreation specialist type of a position. And it also, starting with a preschool-aged programming model, as we all know, preschoolers tend to age up. They grow as much as we may not want them to, they do. And that's where you start to build that programming down the line, where you start to utilize those youth programs and you can kind of grow those forward. We also know that preschool-age programming is a need. Parents have that need. Those children have that need for the social stimulation as well. So that's part of the reason why we would put that forward in a phase two, or adding it to the phase one acceleration. Senior programming, that's if you've been to the community center and you've seen those senior citizens or that social aspect that's occurring, that's been lost for upwards of a year at this point. So that's something that we really do feel that it's important to bring back. It's also one of our strongest elements from the past. We knew that was a population that we served very well through the community center and through our recreation programming. And that's something that we feel like could come back with some evaluation and development. Park shelter rentals, that really goes hand in hand with our park permitting and facility rentals. So that could be something that we could align with. We also know that gathering is being permitted at this point in a larger capacity than what it was during phase two. So that's a logical next step for those promoting that ability to meet outdoors. Community partnerships and volunteers. I do want to just take a second and touch on this as an established need. It's probably the #1 phone call that I receive daily, being people wanting to either partner with the city in some aspect, be it programmatic, or if they want to volunteer, or they want to run some sort of an event or something along those lines. And in the past, up till quite frankly today, we haven't had a resource in place to meet those needs. And this is really our gateway to the community. And to me, that's what Parks and Recreation is, and really a primary need that we need to focus on. And with our ability within phase 3 of the governor's order, we now have that ability to harness some of those partnerships and use that as a building block as we move forward. some of you may be aware, I don't know that we've really talked about it, but the Arts Council utilizes the community center as gallery space. An art gallery isn't really very strong if the doors are always closed. So what we would be proposing is, in conjunction with opening the community center, both for drop-in type activity and even some rentals and summer camps within this summer, there's an opportunity for the Arts Council to host a gallery in the facility. Right now, our walls are very bare in here. So there is an opportunity to move forward with some of that arts programming that there may be a need for. And I think that, that's sort of separate. That's a conversation the Arts Council is working on right now. But I do want to make that an available option to them. That's quite frankly little to no cost other than some staffing time to ensure the facility is open in that aspect. And then administrative services, you see that through the tiers, because as we bring things online, that administrative function grows. So that's really important to remember, that as we bring on additional services, that is growing, and there's going to be a need and an extremely important focus that needs to occur on that. So I don't have too much more to add on this slide. I'm not planning to go into phase 3 at this point, other than I think it's appropriate for the commission to, absolutely take a look and see if there's things that should move over. If I was going to highlight one of potential, and Emily's probably going, oh, Ryan's going to surprise me with something here. I would say it's the potential of work study and internships. Oftentimes for summer programming or different programming, that's an opportunity for us to recruit some lower cost labor that may transition into the future into permanent positions. So if I was going to highlight an element from phase 3, it would be that to maybe think about, and it's something we would think about from an operational standpoint as well as we move through these different phases. So Emily, with that, I will turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. I'm going to give a couple of my reminders, disclaimers. You'll recall all of these categories of programs and services represent past and potential programs and services. And so they aren't necessarily the gamut that it will be offered in the future. They are items for us to consider, and then as there's community need, as there's resources available, then recreation with City Council's blessing, with your blessing, will start to develop these programs and offer them. The other disclaimer that I will give is that we have chosen on phase 2 to identify some categories of programs and services that we think are candidates to accelerate, bring on board earlier as part of the phase 1 sort of implementation, or kind of being early into the timeline that was for phase 2, which begins in 2022. We chose words carefully there because we know there is a bunch of work that needs to happen in order to develop some of these programs to meet community needs and to make sure that we're not just restarting, that we're actually resetting in a way that really hones in on that community need and offers the best possible program or service. And so I'll point out on senior services, we talked about how in the past there was a kind of human services basic need element and a social services component of the city's programming. And we're suggesting that we start with the social element first, because we believe that takes fewer resources, but that whole package of senior services needs to be evaluated. We spoke about volunteer program that the city is talking about, perhaps developing a comprehensive volunteer program that would serve the entire organization, not just the recreation function. And so that may take time and effort to put together. So my special little asterisk note here would be these are the activities that we would try to advance sooner rather than later, but they still are going to require some time to develop. In addition, you all know you have to have the money in place, you have to have the people in place. This is a people provided set of programs and services, so that also takes a little bit of time. But hopefully, if those things are in place, we might be able to deliver some of these programs and services 6 or 12 months earlier than the reset strategy would have otherwise allowed us to do. So I'm going to move to the next, and now it's your time. That's it for slides on the reset strategy. I would love to hear if you have questions or comments on the reset strategy. And as a piece of that, if you have any additional comments or questions or thoughts about what an accelerated roadmap might look like, we'd love to hear that too. Again, a reminder that our hope is that we have enough of a sense of consensus around how you feel about the reset strategy, and some input on the acceleration plan, such that we can package all of that up for you for your consideration during your meeting on April 1st. So I'm going to hand the mic back over to Chair Westberg, and I'm happy to entertain any questions or just listen to comments. Thank you.
Commissioner Cohen.
Don Cohen, I emailed a few things and some of them were non-substantive and they can, take them or leave them. The two substantive things I had on the second question about whether there's anything that we think maybe you would want to move into the more accelerated mode if we're able to do that. What kept jumping out at me, and I guess this is a resource problem, is youth beginner kinds of programs. And I've always thought that the youth beginners sort of suffered by being lumped with intermediate. And so from the point of view of kind of, this is an important thing for the community for all the reasons we know, that was one along with senior transportation. But both of those, I guess, require more human resources than spring break. Yes or no? I don't know.
Longer term resources, I would say. Some of those short duration programs you could perhaps run, for example, by just using a contractor or temporary staff. I guess, Commissioner Cohen, one of the things I failed to say about how we went about contemplating what to accelerate is we still wanted to make sure that we were staying true to the philosophy and the basic structure of this reset strategy. And so we looked at the cost recovery pyramid and we said, okay, if we need to do the lower tiers because that's the foundational supportive services, and we want to do some of the higher level tier categories of programs and services to start to provide some of the cash flow that's needed to then reduce the tax subsidy on those lower tiers. And if we wanted to accelerate, how can we begin bringing in more of those programs and services that may provide the revenue to offset the tax subsidy, particularly if we get the stimulus money, and the stimulus money is able to help us float costs for a short duration of time, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. How can we build programming up in a way that starts to turn that cost recovery engine so that then we can feel more confident about delivering the programs and services that are sort of in the middle of the pyramid that both cover some direct costs, but also require some general fund subsidy. So it's also about thinking with that financial mindset of how do we not get so far out ahead that we are experiencing more cost than we are in bringing in revenue, and therefore we've lost our ability to reach that financial sustainability goal.
Well, as a follow-up, this is Don Cohn again. This is probably in here somewhere, and I'm sure Ryan has told me this. If you haven't, give me an example of a youth beginner program that is now, or was now, or that.
Ryan Daly. Youth ballet would be an example. Like a 1 day a week ballet class, ages 6 to 10 years old, something like that. That would be sort of a youth program.
Okay, so then that gives me a better context, and we're talking about small group or individual kinds of attention, potentially, as Emily said, for a longer period of time during the year than a 2-week break period or something like that. Okay, I understand it.
Right.
And I'll hold my second question, which is unrelated to this one, until other people have a chance. Thank you.
Commissioner Struck.
Yeah, thank you, Peter Struck. My comments are really more not specific programs, because I think that they kind of meet the philosophy and standards we've set. But I kind of think about a couple of things. One, I think we should ensure that we kind of have a what I call a kind of the wide spectrum activities. And I think you addressed that in terms of, it's not going to be all youth. It's not going to be all seniors. You're going to try to, provide a little bit to a lot of different people. Also, I think about, are there particular activities, programs, services that are truly unique that Parks and Recs offers that there are no other private providers, either on the island or available? Because I think, for example, like of preschool activities or after school, there's a lot of that already available from private nonprofits and so forth. So maybe we're unique, maybe not, but things like that. Also, I think about, in this kind of, as we emerge from the COVID pandemic and so forth, clearly one issue as well. Yeah, I got my vaccine, but how quickly am I going to be, coming back to the community center type of thing? And there's a lot of uncertainty about that. So I would look to kind of programs where you think you have and maybe it's just a gut feel, but a higher level of certainty that, they will kind of come back as one would expect. As well as I also think about, what is the level of participation? And what I mean by that is if we look back at question 3 in the reset survey where the respondents were asked, how often do you visit? And if you just kind of said, well, that's representative of the island, which I know is kind of a leap, but just it's all we have. There's some 500,000 visits a year based on that data. And so if we were to kind of say, well, in phase 1, the set of activities are, only reach 10,000 visits, I kind of scratched my head and said, maybe we should kind of rethink that. I don't know what those numbers are, but I think that that's something you should be aware of. And then finally, and I think you mentioned it, Ryan, is, activities that kind of have a common nexus in terms of either programming, setup, and so forth. It makes sense to try to lump those together and offer them out, because I think on the margin, those will probably be easier to set up than, totally disparate types of activities. So I think we're clearly on the right path, and I just urge you to kind of take some of these thoughts I had into consideration as you kind of think about the total package that's being offered. Thank you.
Commissioner McCarthy. Jody, you need to unmute.
Sorry about that. Jody McCarthy. Looking at everything and thinking about what we should be doing, I really feel like, especially looking at the long answer responses that we got from the survey, that opening up the community center for people is a good thing to be doing, especially with Ryan suggesting the using it again as an art gallery that gets the Arts Council involved. But two, starting to set up the drop-in programs like the pickleball, for example. It's not something that's going to be very staff intensive, but it will give an opportunity for us to know what the interest is for people to be coming back into the community center. And that's sort of an easy way to ease into it, see what people are interested in and what they want to come to the community center for, without having to put a lot of time and money behind making a program and hiring staff for that part of it. Thank you.
This is Commissioner Westberg. First of all, I'd just like to congratulate the team on putting together this package overall. I think it's an excellent package, an excellent presentation. It very logically takes you from where we were to a much more thoughtful and structured approach to making some very tough decisions about in the future about the kinds of programs that are going to be offered and how they're going to be financed. And I think it sets us up, us as a community, us as a Parks and Recreation department, for success in my view. I think considering what was there before was a little more haphazard and a little more, off the cuff. This is really a good structure and a good framework to sort of make, as Emily said, make all those decisions a little more purposeful and a little more clear as far as why we're making one decision versus another. So that's sort of my general statement about the overall strategy. As far as looking at accelerating programs, that's an exciting, to me, that's an exciting prospect. But I think we need to do it with the same, obviously with the same thoughtfulness that has been characterized by the approach overall. So I agree with Jody. I think getting the community center open sooner rather than later, even if it's just for low-key drop-in kinds of activities, is really important. Having the art gallery function resume would be terrific, because that's what brought me down to the community center a lot of times, was to see the artwork, or the, if there was word about a new exhibit or something like that. By the way, does Parks and Rec get a cut on any artwork that's sold in those exhibitions?
I believe so.
We do.
Yeah, so it could be a moneymaker. Who knows? I would also support, along looking at preschools and senior programs, moving those forward if possible, moving forward the scholarship programs. But again, I agree with Peter. It should be things that programs that are highly valued, that are well attended, and that are not necessarily duplicated elsewhere in the community. Although it's clear from it was clear from the pros plan survey and other comments that islanders like to take advantage of opportunities on the island. That doesn't necessarily mean they have to be Parks and Rec, but they like doing things here. Let's see. This is just kind of a general comment about the the presentation. And I agree with the comment Don made, I think in one of his emails, that the table on page 23 and 24 was very valuable. I think it could be made, for the thinking of the city council, it could be made even more clear if you added to that table an example where it was appropriate of the type of program that falls under that category. Obviously, something like the boat launch, you don't need one. But like when you're talking about senior programs or that of a social nature versus a human resource nature, things like that, it would be helpful to have an example that would illustrate what that category is referring to. Or like the social or human services example, or the therapeutic programs, that kind of thing. That was I think as far as, again, as far as moving, sorry, I'm kind of jumping around, as far as moving programs forward, the therapeutic ones stuck out in my mind a little bit, but I don't have a good sense of what those programs were and whether they had a very limited participation, a limited group of people that were covered by those. And I know seniors hold their transportation program in high esteem, but that's something that we had even talked about, is whether or not that was appropriate for as a continued program under Parks and Rec. So that will take some, I'm sure, some further study, but just thinking about the people that have been impacted in the isolation they've experienced, I think it would be good to start slow, but introduce senior programming as rapidly as possible.
Chair Westberg, if I could chime in real quick, you triggered a thought with me. This is Ryan Daly. When you mentioned therapeutic recreation and whatnot, I do want to highlight for the commission that we do make a payment to Bellevue, City of Bellevue Parks and Recreation, allowing for our residents to receive all of the benefits of a Bellevue resident through their programming, which is fairly robust. I would also just put out there in a recommendation of a community type position or a volunteer in partnerships. We do partner with a lot of these organizations, and that's something that without a doubt would continue. From an actual staff providing the service, that is something that was rather limited in the past. Not to say that it would continue to be limited, but it's something we would want to look at as we move forward and evaluate. And just kind of frankly, just see how to best meet that community's need. There's some relationship building that could occur that I think would be really important between us and the school district, as well as other providers.
Yes, and Chair, if I could also just add on to what Ryan said, in the cost recovery chart, I think what we contemplated, and this isn't clear, is a moment in time in the future when the city of Mercer Island might be able to provide on its own or host more therapeutic recreation, develop its own kind of adaptive rec programs. I think the offering of programs and services via Bellevue is an easy thing to get done earlier, and we've been contemplating that. So when you see therapeutic rec living in phase 3 in the reset strategy and still in phase 3 in the accelerated plan, that's really speaking to the moment in time, perhaps, when the city would have its own in-house and more robust programming on that front. We may be able to offer those same sort of services a little bit differently in the building or off island, as has been done in the past earlier.
Thanks for that clarification. Commissioner Cohen.
Don Cohen, on the therapeutic services, I wonder whether a footnote commenting on the availability at Bellevue, at least at present, is useful to think about, because it, we had the person come in, I can't remember if it was on this or on the pros plan, talking about the Mercer Park issues and that whole group. So I think more information is better than less information on that. I had two comments. One picks up on something that Rory mentioned. When I read through this material, I was thinking of the audience being, yes, the city council, but also the public and people who haven't spent 4 months trying to understand this. And so when I looked at that chart on page 23 and 24, I really appreciated that chart. And I agree with Rory, there may be a little more example information that could be put on it. But I also wondered whether it ought to be earlier in it, in the whole thing, because to me, I struggled with trying to understand what do these things mean in the real world for weeks and weeks. So as as Ryan knows and Emily knows. So that was, again, I'm not saying that that's necessary, but at least it seemed to me to be something to consider. A similar thing, and this is something I'm almost embarrassed that I hadn't noticed this before. When you look at the pyramid, the tier pyramid, there in the individual tiers, there is no specific logic to the order that they're in. So it's not alphabetical. It isn't priority. And I wasn't sure about that when I read later on about something else where you said in this document, these are not in order of priority, some about something else. And then there was another one that said they are in order of priority. And here you have this detailed pyramid. And I started scratching my head about what somebody in the public might or might not think. On the other hand, I know that if you start fooling around with that stuff, then you got to start fooling around with a whole bunch of other pyramid stuff later on. But I thought at least it was worth sharing my reaction to it.
Commissioner McCarthy.
Thank you, Jody McCarthy. As we were talking, it made me think about when Peter said, opportunities that are unique to Parks and Rec for programming. It made me think about a few years ago, I know that the city was approached by an outdoor preschool wanting to have some space in the parks. And it just occurred to me that is a really unique position for Parks and Rec to be in. Probably something that people would be really interested in, especially now to have a mostly outdoor preschool program. And then it made me think, beyond that, to who else can we partner with to bring events, get events done on the island, and to get more programming that would be unique for Parks and Rec, but not having to rely solely on just us creating it and implementing it all the time, but especially the outdoor preschool, because I just think that would be something that would be very exciting. Thank you.
Really good. Chair Westberg, if I might, on that note, I think one of the great things about this reset and about phasing in programs and services is that we will be able to think about new opportunities. What are some of those trends? What are others trying that maybe we could try? And in particular, I'm excited about the fact that our community members have re-engaged, reacquainted themselves with our outdoor amenities. And so I think there's a world of opportunity to try to develop an advanced programming that involves our outdoor spaces. So I just wanted to add that again, it's another good reason to not just restart everything that we did before, but instead, if we have a finite amount of resources, let's think about how to fill those niches like you've been talking about, meet community need, not duplicate, but also take advantage of what we've learned over this past challenging year.
This is Commissioner Westberg. I had a question about kind of next steps with regard to this reset plan. When you complete a park master plan, it very often gets incorporated into the overall planning structure for the municipality you're involved with or whatever. This is more of an operational plan, but what happens after this is approved, and how does it become operationalized and implemented, and how does it continue to be referred to and followed as because it's future focused, as we've said many times, and how does it continue to guide the difficult decisions that will have to be made down the road?
Really great. I love that question. To be honest, Chair, I think we have some work to do to really contemplate how to get it ingrained. I think part of it is just via the mechanism of the council endorsing it, that becomes the thing that we turn back to every time we have to go back to city council to ask to move to the next step, for example. We're going to have to ground it into the reset strategy. I think we're going to have to recall the reset strategy every time we bring a new policy to you and tell you how it fits, how it's consistent, how it advances that strategy. I think operationally, we haven't had enough time to dialogue about how to live the strategy on a daily basis in the operations, because there are decisions that are being made every day administratively that could impact our success in seeing the strategy be successful. And that's the piece that I think staff is going to have to spend some time on. How can they embed the strategy in their procedures to make sure that they're consistent? One example of that we have spoken with you about, the commission about, is we need to develop those program evaluation tools so that we make sure before we market a program and offer a program that it is fitting the criteria that it needs to fit, and that we've developed a budget so that we're ready to monitor its financial performance, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just one example. I don't have the playbook yet, but we're working on it, and you are absolutely right in assuming that's going to be critical. And I would hope that the staff is frequently, as it's bringing policies your way, or it's talking about implementing new programs and it wants your input on those, that they are referencing the strategy going forward.
Yeah, there are, this is Commissioner Westberg, there are implicit in the strategy, there are a lot of things that need to be put into place to make it work that are acknowledged in the document, but there's still a huge lift there that has to be made in order to be able to make it operational. Anybody else have any questions, comments, whatever on the reset strategy? How do you all feel about whether or not or being in a position to approve this with some additional modifications at our next meeting, I guess, huh? Any thoughts? You can just, Commissioner McCarthy.
Thank you. This is Jody McCarthy. I'm excited, and I feel like, yes, it needs some tweaks, but I think we're on the right page and that we need to start going forward with this plan and start taking the steps to make this an actionable thing, because time is not on our side right now. And it's exciting that we're going into phase 3 with the 50%. And people are getting vaccinated. And so they're going to want to see the city opening up and having opportunities in the community center and in the parks again for people. Thanks.
Commissioner Struck.
Thank you, Peter Struck. Yeah, I would just essentially second Jody's comments that, yeah, it's time to kind of, let's move forward. I think we've got a good plan here. Is it perfect? Probably not, but I don't think we should, wait for perfect, if you will. And as I think Ryan mentioned earlier, flexibility is a key, and let's just get going. Thank you.
Commissioner Cohen.
Don Cohen, ditto.
Thanks, Don. Okay, does that give you guys what you need?
Yes, that's great. What I am hoping is that as Ryan has conversations with your colleagues that weren't able to join on this call, that we can send you some highlights of feedback that we think maybe are new or different from what you've discussed tonight, or indicate to you that we heard similar things, so that you'll have some sense of, are we still moving forward for April 1st to be able to contemplate endorsing a slightly revised strategy and send it over to the City Council for the April 20th joint meeting.
Ryan may want to think about how that squares with open meeting issues, but that's his problem.
Commissioner McCarthy.
Yeah, thank you, Jody McCarthy. Shoot, I lost my train of thought. Oh, here it is. Okay. What I was thinking of was, as part of the strategy, I think it would be really great to look at revamping the website a little bit for Parks and Rec and making it more user-friendly, because you can get lost in the weeds trying to find information, and that's not helpful for anybody at all. And there is so much great information on it. I think it's a little bit too dense sometimes in how much information is on a page, and that gets overwhelming for people. And so they will miss opportunities to find programming that they really would be interested in because they didn't know how to search for it with the correct keyword, or however things are broken down. And then secondly, and part of that was, I didn't realize until recently that tennis instructors could book time on the public courts and things like that. And do we have that resource information available? Because there are people that are wanting that information, and how do you find that? Because I didn't even know that was a thing. So that's just an example of something that would be on the website for people to find that information. Thanks.
Okay, so it looks like we do have some time, or we'll have some time to wade into differential pricing and
Great.
and talking about draft fees. Do we need a 5-minute break before we do that? Or should we just, let's take the break. Let's take 5 minutes and
Okay, very
everybody
good.
can
Okay, thank you.
have a drink of water or whatever. So we'll be back here at 6:50. Okay? Thanks. Okay, I think everybody's back. So I didn't mean to skip the, let's see. Well, let me ask, is the next item up the differential pricing policies, or did you want to go over the other attachment, exhibit 2?
We'll talk differential pricing.
Okay,
Great. Okay, I'm going to share screen again so we can do that. Everybody see it? Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so by way of definition first, differential pricing is charging different prices to different groups of people based on certain characteristics. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those characteristics might be. And so the key here is that you're offering the same service to everyone, but you're charging different users, different participants, different amounts. And there's reasons for that. And first and foremost, the reasons are typically to make sure that there's better equity and access. And in some cases that there's just more efficient service delivery. So an example of that would be if you have a program that costs a certain amount to run for 8 weeks, and you have built the program's budget over 8 weeks of revenue, and you only get 7 weeks full, and there's something about week number 8 that is not attracting people, you might then lower the price in order to fill the seats, basically to meet your cost recovery goals, for example. So the city does use certain types of differential pricing today. The city has, for example, a resident or non-resident sort of price break where residents are able to participate in some programs at a reduced fee than what is charged to non-residents. You have currently some differential pricing for facility rentals. So you have a Mercer Island nonprofit rate that you will give to those organizations. And that might be different than, say, a corporate user's rental rate for the same amenity. Mercer Island has differential pricing for field rentals. In some cases, that's based on the asset. There's a price differential between, say, the artificial turf and the natural grass fields, but also the city uses differential pricing based on the type of user group that is using the fields. For example, I believe youth programs or organizations get a reduced rate and adult organizations pay more. The other differential pricing that the city has used for many years is through the scholarship program, which we've spoken about in previous meetings. This is a program that helps, enables lower income individuals or households to be able to register for programs, providing them with a cost reduction based on ability to pay. But there are other types of differential pricing that the city could consider. And I would say there are considerations that we should entertain about the current structure, where we are giving differential prices and to whom. Do we have the right categories lined up where we're giving those price breaks? Is that consistent with some of our other goals and values that we've discussed as we've built this reset strategy? So some new ideas could include adding more differential pricing opportunities based on the age of the participant. We've talked about some of that happens now, but maybe there's some other opportunities there to encourage, say, more seniors to take advantage of programs, or families with the youngest children, or maybe you want to incentivize teenagers to use the facilities programs. Any of that would be an example. Location of facility. We spoke tonight about offering perhaps more outdoor programs. Maybe that's something you really want to foster, and therefore maybe you could use a differential price to try to encourage people to engage in outdoor recreation programming. Time or season, that's another thing some communities take into consideration. Oftentimes that is done with facility rentals, thinking about when you might want to incentivize individuals to rent the facility for a large event. There's typically peak season and an off season to some of that. So those are examples. Quantity of use. City does some of that now. For example, there's a price break for buying a pass for the fitness center, for example. But you could do more of that. You could offer more package deals to take advantage of the city's recreation services. And another incentive, another way that you might have differential pricing is to encourage early registration. You may be piloting new programs in the future, and you may want to push people to try those new programs. And so you might give a price break for people who sign on early enough that enables you to go forward with confidence and book the instructor, or hire an additional temporary staff member or something like that. And then lastly, many communities are using differential pricing to advance their diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. And so that might be another thing that the city of Mercer Island would like to think about. Is there a particular population that you feel isn't accessing the programs and services for whatever reason? And maybe you can help that situation by adding some differential pricing to encourage that participation or to enable it. So those are just some ideas. Again, tonight, all that we wanted to do was introduce this topic, to tell you that we're wrestling with it. And we're thinking about it as we develop the phase 1 fee schedule. And we'll be thinking about it as we look forward to implementing additional fee schedules. It's quite likely that we're going to produce the fee schedule for phase 1 before we have adopted some additional policies or tweaked current ones, and that's okay. Again, we want to move forward in a very thoughtful way, but this is an opportunity for you to just share some thoughts about how you feel about differential pricing. Are there particular categories that we've talked about that you would be interested in and you would like us to research and pursue?
Commissioner McCarthy.
Thank you. This is Jody McCarthy. Something that I was thinking about after reading the comments on this survey was, what about giving people an option to pay more if they can or would like to? For example, the many donation websites now, they have the option for you to pay for the credit card processing fees. And so you can add that on, if they could add that onto the registration, and that would be a way of getting that revenue back for the city. Another thing would be have an option maybe for them to pay for a scholarship or for others to participate in that particular program or any program really, and have that as a question, as an option for people to be able to put in a dollar amount. Would you like to give somebody else the opportunity to enjoy the programming at the community center or with Parks and Rec? So those are my 2 cents. Thanks.
Commissioner Cohen?
Don Cohen, I wanted to ask Emily, you said there were some other communities that used differential pricing with diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. What's an example or two of that?
Sure, I believe both Seattle and Bellevue do, as 2 examples.
But what do they do?
Oh, sure.
What is, I'm sorry, what is it? Yeah.
Yeah, so the city, in those cases, the cities have adopted citywide plans and strategies to enhance their equity and their service provision, and have also adopted master plans, master strategies for Parks and Recreation to advance those same goals. And so the differential pricing is a piece of that. And I can't speak exactly what that looks like because I can't recall, but in some cases they have identified populations that are not taking advantage of the recreation programs. And so there's a application process where they can apply and say that they meet certain criteria and are able to participate. One other example that just popped into my head, Portland, Oregon is doing a ton of this. Portland, Oregon is doing it in a very unique way where they have identified certain areas of town or neighborhoods where they even have satellite recreation centers or facilities. And those recreation facilities are underutilized. Those neighborhoods are not taking advantage of programs and services. In many cases, those are lower income or minority, majority communities. And the city has said, we believe that this neighborhood can benefit from our services and programs. And in order to make that happen and have a healthier, more inclusive community, we want to offer the programming that's going to fit the need and be of interest, but we're also going to offer some differential pricing in those neighborhoods. So taking a program in neighborhood A might be less than taking that same program in neighborhood B. So that's another example based on the demographics of the neighborhood.
Can I ask a follow-up, Rory, or make a follow-up comment?
Sure.
I personally am in favor of those kinds of programs. If it's the one in Portland that I've been familiar with, it's been subject to a lot of controversy, different viewpoints on it. And as you go further in this, some additional specific examples of Seattle, Bellevue, what they do, what they don't do, what they legally can do, what they can't do. To the extent that the commission even gets involved in that, I'd be interested in it because it is it's something that when you just say it in the general terms, people either say, oh yeah, I'm for that, or they might scratch their head and say, what's she talking about in the real world? So I appreciate the Portland example. Thanks.
Really good. Thanks. Yeah, it's a complex issue and it should be tied to city goals, in my opinion, overall city goals. Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Struck.
Thank you, Peter Struck. So a couple comments. I spent a lot of time on differential pricing and so forth, and it can get real complex real fast. And so if you don't have the software to manage it, it can kind of become a morass real quickly. So just, I'm sure you're aware of that, but you don't want to kind of put the cart before the horse on this one. Secondly, you're basically trying to, with differential pricing, you're trying to change consumer behavior. And again, and consumer behavior clearly can be changed by pricing. There's no doubt about that. But I think it's important that it's done in a very methodical way, and there's kind of no surprises. And again, you kind of think of airline pricing as an example where prices are literally changing potentially every second, to where, well, right now the city and most municipalities, they produce a pricing sheet that's probably good for, 3, 6, 9, 12 months. And then it's reviewed and potentially changed type of thing. So, if you want to kind of move to being more variable differential pricing and so forth, you need to have the software to do it. And I appreciate Don's comments, Commissioner Cohen's, about the diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think there would need to be a lot of education and understanding on that issue, because I think the community of Mercer Island is quite a bit different than Portland, Seattle, and maybe to a lesser extent Bellevue. Thank you.
This is Commissioner Westberg. I'll chip in my 2 cents. I think in looking at, I agree with what Commissioner Struck just said. I think differential pricing is a good idea. I think at least out of the gate, trying to keep it manageable and simple is probably going to be the best strategy. Maybe even creating a hierarchy where you look at perhaps at resident versus non-resident as being, an overriding principle, and then you look at some of these other opportunities to fine-tune participation or to promote the interests of one group over another or something like that, but not, at least initially, not make it too complex. Anybody else have any comments on differential pricing? Commissioner Cohen.
Sorry, Don Cohen. Maybe Peter knows the answer to this, and I'm sure that Ryan and Emily do. Is differential pricing, sort of the elasticity of demand, does that work as well with a fairly wealthy community like Mercer Island? Do the same, supply and demand curves as might be true somewhere else hold up? Does that still work? I mean, do you get more if you price it differently? Will more people go to outdoor programs? Just as an example.
I believe so. Just
Okay.
that the range of the tolerance and the magnitude of the shift can be a little bit different, but from what I've studied, yes, should still apply.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other comments, I guess we proceed to the draft fee schedule.
Fantastic. Thank you all for your initial comments and questions and ideas, and Chair Westberg's idea about approaching this in kind of a sequential way based on priorities, and all of your input about keeping it simple. We will have that in mind. But do know that I expect at some point over the next few months, we'll be double checking that either the existing policy is still to your liking, or if we can recommend some minor tweaks, at least initially, we will be bringing that forward to you so that we can get it implemented as early as possible so that it can affect fee schedule and help us hopefully drive the changes in behavior that we want to see. Thank you. I'm gonna go to the next slide, and then I'm gonna turn the mic over to, I think it's Meryl, right?
Sure, I'll take it. Thanks, Meryl Thomas-Schott. We won't say too much on this. We can talk about it as you like. You all saw very draft fee schedule for phase 1 and early phase 2 program and service fees. As one of the commissioners mentioned previously, this is not only is this not a final document, but it's not a stagnant document. This is one that we expect to change throughout the reset process and kind of our reopening, but even in the future, we'll be kind of utilizing the work that we did together here to apply to all of our programs and services in the future. So essentially where we are at and how we're focusing our work on this is, we identified some areas of interest to amend our previous fees through that fee study process we did of our kind of neighbors and competitors. Also just been a lot of discussion on what has worked, what doesn't work, what we think the community would appreciate, from sitting at the front desk to booking a wedding at in the Mercer room. We'll apply our pricing strategy and also kind of that market lens that looks different for a rental versus a program. And then, as Emily mentioned, we're sort of concurrently working on some of the policies that will impact the final fees. So that's another reason this is quite draft. The more we talk about it, the more ideas that we have and options we come up with. So the example in your packet is really just sort of meant to show, here's what we're looking at. Here's what we think might work. We're going to run it through that pricing strategy. And you'll see another draft, I'm sure, in future meetings. But wanted to give you an example of kind of what it'll look like, what it will include, and where we're at with it.
This is Commissioner Westberg. So when you talk about the pricing strategy, I assume you're referring back to the pyramid and cost recovery goals and all of that. Because as I looked at this, I thought, well, how you have to be competitive with your neighbor, but we also have cost recovery targets we're trying to hit and trying to balance all that out. So
right.
I assume that's one of the challenges you're addressing.
Yeah, exactly.
Finalize this.
And where we have a little more flexibility, where we think, the market can bear a little more here. As Jody mentioned, we saw from the survey, some folks coming from off island to play pickleball are more than willing to pay more than what we maybe thought they were. So that kind of all goes into that strategy by program. Thanks.
Any questions or thoughts from other commissioners? Commissioner McCarthy.
Thank you, Jody McCarthy. I just was intrigued by the fitness class personal training fees and comparing that with Bellevue and Seattle, and it seems they just seem really radically different to me. So I just would love to get a more explanation about those. Thanks.
What you have, what you see there of what we had previously, essentially what we did was apply our lowest special event permit fee to our outdoor fitness groups and did it by, instead of by session, by season, because we wanted the fee to relate back to something that we already kind of had in our fee schedule. Very few people took advantage of that permit, an outdoor fitness permit, and they would either do it anyway or hide from us. Or so this is one that we want to make accessible to users, especially as things are more outside. So it's one we haven't discussed as a team very much, but I think it's one we all recognize should be user-friendly, clear, and on how people can use it. So that's the two that I found for Bellevue and Seattle were the first I'd really seen. I think maybe this is a post-COVID or mid-COVID phenomenon that is just more popular and people are kind of coming up with their policies and strategies. So we're right there with other folks, but that's one that we'll take a look at.
Great, thanks.
Is that for courses or for individual?
It's like if you someone runs a boot camp class or trains a group of people in a park, and it's generally it's a roving location. One day they'll be under the picnic shelter to do push-ups, and then the next day they're running at the track. So it's less of a it's not even so much a field rental because they're kind of all over the place.
Yeah, hard to corral that.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments? Okay,
Thank you very much. All right, I'm just going to cover next steps really quickly, and then we will be done for the evening. So as I've said, I think a few times, we're going to make changes based on the comments we have received and anything that we hear from your colleagues as we meet with them over the next few days. And then we'll prepare that same kind of packet with the reset plan, the acceleration plan, and bring that to you to consider on April 1st. We're also planning to have an updated resourcing plan for phase 1 and phase 1A, the accelerated version, for you on April 1st. We're hoping that you'll take action on April 1st to both recommend the reset strategy and recommend a resource plan. Then we will be busy between the 1st and the packet deadline for April 20th, preparing the presentation for the joint meeting with City Council. And I'll warn Commission members, we will be presenting a lot of what you have heard already. It's really the main audience is the City Council and the general public. And so we will be going back over what is cost recovery, for example, and what is the pyramid all about. We will be doing some of that, and we're going to work really hard to try to figure out just how much do they need to hear in order to feel comfortable with it. And then our hope would be after the April 20th meeting, when the City Council has time to ask their questions and provide their comments, that we would take their feedback and again, true up anything that we need to, and bring back the reset strategy and the implementation plan, resources plan to the City Council in May for them to take action. And so our hope is by the end of May, we have clear direction from both the Parks and Recreation Commission and the City Council on how we should proceed. And that come June, we are rocking and rolling with all of the activities that we will need to be doing, developing budgets and the monitoring system, and developing the policies and the practices, and marketing new staff positions and hiring new staff, and then communicating which programs and services will be available to the community and when. So that's a lot to look forward to. So April and May are very important in order for us to be able to have programs and services to deliver beginning this summer and through the remainder of this year. So if there are any other questions about next steps, I'll take those.
Commissioner Cohen has his hand up.
Don Cohen, if it's possible for the final version that you send to us for the April 1 meeting, if it's possible to either direct us to where the changes are, or a highlight or red line or something, because no offense, but I don't want to read it over again from page 1. And since at least 4 of us are, this close to being comfortable with it, that would really expedite things, unless there are major substantive changes either from the other commissioners or otherwise. Thank you.
Very good. You got it.
Emily, this is Commissioner Westberg. I have a question too, and it concerns, we talked tonight about accelerating certain programs forward. So what will that be presented to the council as a contingency, or will that be incorporated in a revised plan?
Sure. I think at this point, I don't, as Commissioner Cohen suggested, I don't want to go through and change everything. So I think we'll make the minor changes that are needed to the reset strategy, and then we'll give a separate document that will be an option to consider for the acceleration plan. Then City Council can talk about them separately or together if they'd like. and split the difference if they would like to as well. They'll have a couple of options to choose at that point.
Okay, great. Thanks for that clarification. Ryan, anything else from your end before we adjourn?
I would just add, thank you for all of the time that you all spent on the phone with me this last week. It's extremely helpful. It showed tonight. I mean, you guys are outstanding in the preparation that you're providing. So again, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. So our next regular meeting of the Parks and Recreation Commission is April 1st at 5:30. The time is now 7:20 and this meeting is adjourned. However, as a reminder, please stay seated until the city staff has terminated the Zoom broadcast. So good evening and enjoy our burgeoning spring.